They said the Calloway name was built on land, cattle, and power. But no one ever mentioned love. In the blazing summer of 1884, Garrett Calloway, heir to a vast cattle empire, stood at the altar expecting a business deal disguised as a wedding. He thought he was marrying duty, not destiny. He thought he was marrying a shadow, not a woman who could unravel his pride and remake his world. When Evelyn McCrae lifted her veil, it wasn't just her face revealed. It was fire, strength, and a secret that could change everything. What began as an arrangement soon became a storm of desire, defiance, and devotion under the endless skies of the Colorado frontier. From battles with outlaws to whispered confessions under starlight, theirs was a love that shouldn't have existed, yet refused to die. This is not just a marriage of convenience. This is a fight for land, for legacy, and for the kind of love that can burn hotter than the western sun. The summer sun of 1884 beat down hard on the Colorado territory, searing the earth until it cracked like old porcelain. Dust rose with every hoofbeat and wagon wheel, swirling in the hot air before settling again upon the tired land. The Calloway Ranch stretched wide across that land, miles of barbed wire fences, cattle scattered like ants across the dry plains, and the looming silhouette of the ranch house on the rise. Garrett Calloway stood at the edge of the veranda, his broad shoulders hunched, a Stetson shading his dark eyes. He had his father's stance, rigid, commanding, but none of his father's hunger for empire. At 29, Garrett had worked the ranch since he could walk, driven cattle across rivers, and broken more horses than he could count. But the ledger book stacked in his study reminded him daily that Calloway land and Calloway cattle were not enough to keep the dynasty growing. His father, Byron Calloway, the cattle baron of the Colorado Front Range, had already decided the matter for him. Garrett was to marry Evelyn McCrae, the daughter of a once prosperous ranching family. Their union would bind 2 parcels of land, strengthen grazing rights, and fend off eastern speculators sniffing at the territory like vultures. To Garrett, it sounded less like a marriage and more like a branding. "Son," Byron said that morning, pacing the long dining table as if it were a battlefield, "this isn't about love. It's about land, about legacy. The McCraes have water rights we need, and we've got cattle they need. You'll marry the girl, and that's the end of it." Garrett had nodded, though his jaw tightened. He barely remembered Evelyn McCrae, a shy figure from picnics long past, a girl with red hair hidden beneath bonnets, freckles across her nose. Rumor said she'd grown plain with age. Others whispered she'd grown proud. Whatever the truth, Garrett didn't care. A wife was a wife. A deal was a deal. Still that night, alone on the porch with the stars. Overhead, Garrett wondered, was he agreeing to a future or to a prison? The church was small, wooden, and smelled faintly of pine tar and candle wax. The whole town had gathered, though not all out of celebration. Weddings in the territory were as much business as pleasure, and everyone wanted to see the cattle baron's son tethered. Garrett stood at the altar, stiff in his black frock coat, boots polished until they shone. His eyes scanned the pews. Ranch hands in clean shirts, women fanning themselves against the heat, children squirming under mothers' hands. His father loomed in the front row, a silver watch chain glinting against his vest, expression carved from granite. Then the doors creaked open. Evelyn McCrae stepped inside, her arm hooked through her uncle's. She wore white, not the frilly lace Eastern brides flaunted, but a simple gown of muslin, long-sleeved, modest. What struck everyone, though, was the veil. It draped low over her face, sheer but heavy, concealing every feature. A ripple of whispers ran through the church like wind through wheat. Garrett's pulse ticked once, then twice. He hadn't expected nerves. She walked steadily, not faltering, her chin high despite the weight of curious eyes. When she reached him, Garrett caught the faint scent of lavender soap, and beneath that something sharper, like cedar smoke. He couldn't see her eyes, her mouth, her expression, just the outline of her. The vows blurred in his ears. Words of obedience and faithfulness meant for contracts rather than hearts. When the preacher declared them man and wife, Evelyn's gloved hand lay cool in his. He felt her grip tighten just once, quick, purposeful, as if to say, "We're in this together, whether you like it or not." When the veil remained, even after the kiss, Garrett realized Evelyn McCrae was not simply shy. She was guarding something. The reception spilled into the Calloway ranch house yard. Fiddles played, whiskey flowed, boots stomped in dust. Garrett sat stiff beside his new bride at the long table. nodding politely to ranchers who came to toast their union. Evelyn hardly spoke, her veil still in place. She sipped water, ate little, and endured stares with the patience of a saint or a soldier. Later, when lanterns burned low and the fiddlers packed up, Garrett led her inside. His boots echoed against the hardwood floor of the great house. He opened the door to the room that would now be hers. "You'll be comfortable here," he said, voice low, unsure. At last, Evelyn raised a hand to her veil. Garrett's breath caught, expectation tangled with dread. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted it. Her face emerged. Not plain, not ugly, not even close. Her features were striking, though not delicate. High cheekbones, a strong jaw softened by a full mouth, eyes the color of storm clouds, watchful and unyielding. Red hair spilled loose from beneath the bonnet, glinting fire in the lamplight. Garrett exhaled, a sound closer to disbelief than relief. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "I wear the veil," she said quietly, "because it is easier for men to underestimate a woman they cannot see." For the first time that day, Garrett smiled. Just barely. The days that followed were not tender. They were practical. Evelyn rose before dawn, moving through the ranch house with purpose. She managed kitchen accounts, kept the household staff in line, and even ventured into the stables, skirts tied up, to see the horses for herself. Garrett watched from a distance, bemused and wary. At night they shared the same roof but not the same bed. Their conversations were short, measured, often circling around land, cattle, or weather. And yet, in the pauses, something shifted. One evening, Garrett found her in the study, bent over his ledgers. "You keep sloppy books," she remarked, pencil tapping against a page. He bristled. "Those books kept this ranch afloat." She looked up, eyes glinting. "Barely. You're running cattle thin across land that won't hold them come winter, and you're paying drovers more than necessary. Cut waste, move cattle south before the freeze, and you might see profit." Garrett opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. From then on, evenings often found them side by side, heads bent over figures and maps. Silence filled the room, but it was not empty. It was alive, charged, unspoken. The summer storm came without warning. Lightning cracked across the sky, and within minutes the dry grassland ignited. Flames raced faster than horses, devouring fences, stampeding cattle. Garrett was already in the saddle, shouting orders, when he saw Evelyn, skirts tucked, hair flying, riding out with a bucket brigade. "You shouldn't be here," he yelled over the roar. "And leave your men to burn?" She shot back, face smeared with soot. Side by side they fought the fire, throwing water, beating back sparks with wet sacks, driving cattle toward the river. Smoke clawed their throats, sparks singed their skin. Garrett caught glimpses of her through the haze, determined, fearless, alive. Hours later, when the last flames died and the men slumped in exhaustion, Garrett found Evelyn sitting on a fence rail, breathing hard, sweat streaking her face. He climbed up beside her. For a long time they sat in silence, watching embers glow. Finally he said, "You're not what I expected." She glanced at him, weary but steady. "Neither are you." The days turned softer after the fire. Not gentle, never gentle, but softer. Garrett found himself looking for her in the mornings, listening for her step in the halls. She still wore the veil in public, but at night, when they shared the quiet of the porch beneath the stars, her face was uncovered. She spoke of her family's losses, of brothers taken by fever, of land dwindled under debts. He spoke of his father's iron will, of the burden of legacy. Words that once felt dangerous now came easier, falling like stones into water, leaving ripples. One night she said, "We weren't meant to fall in love, Garrett." He turned to her, the lamplight catching in his eyes. "Maybe not. But maybe that's why it matters." The silence between them was no longer empty. It was promise. Byron Calloway did not believe in softness. He built his empire with iron, cattle, and men who feared him more than they feared the law. To him, marriage was nothing more than a treaty. And though he'd orchestrated Garrett's union with Evelyn McCrae, he soon saw something he did not like: his son listening to his wife. It began with small things. Garrett implemented Evelyn's suggestions in the ledgers. He rotated grazing lands, cut unnecessary expenses, and redirected drovers where they were most needed. Within weeks, the books began to show margin. Byron noticed. "You're letting that girl meddle in men's affairs," he said one morning at the breakfast table, his fork stabbing at bacon like a weapon. Garrett's jaw tightened. "She has a sharp mind. The ranch benefits." "The ranch benefits when you lead," Byron snapped, his eyes pale as winter ice fixed on Garrett. "Don't forget whose name built this land. Don't forget who you are." Evelyn, seated quietly beside Garrett, set down her cup. She did not speak, but her silence carried weight. Byron felt it. He despised it. That day marked the beginning of a storm neither of them could yet see. Word spread quickly through the settlement. The Calloway bride was no meek wife. Shopkeepers noticed she paid with precision, counting coins without error. The schoolmistress whispered of Evelyn's donation to the children's supplies. Blacksmiths swore she rode like a Comanche, skirts flying, unafraid of dirt or danger. But not all whispers were kind. "She hides behind that veil," said Mrs. Kettering, the banker's wife, fanning herself on the church steps. "Surely it means something shameful." "Maybe scarred," another offered, "or worse." "She's bewitched the Calloway boy," muttered a ranch hand in the saloon. "Got him dancing to her tune." Garrett heard the talk. He dismissed most of it until he saw the way townsfolk looked at Evelyn when she passed. Curiosity sharpened into suspicion. She bore it with composure, her chin lifted, her step steady. But Garrett felt a sting each time. One evening, as they walked back from town, he said, "You don't have to wear the veil anymore, not with me, not with anyone." Evelyn's gaze drifted across the dark horizon. "I wear it," she murmured, "because it reminds me of the cost of being seen. Some things are easier hidden." Garrett wanted to press her, but something in her tone held him back. In the quiet of her room, Evelyn kept a box. Inside were letters never sent, folded pages bearing words of grief, anger, and confession. Letters to her mother, long dead. Letters to her brothers, buried too young. Letters to herself, reminding her that she was not just a pawn in ranchers' bargains. One letter, worn and creased from many readings, bore only a single line. "Do not let them break you." She had promised her dying mother she would hold the McCrae name with pride, even if their land was lost. And she had sworn never to reveal the darkest truth, that her father's debts had been paid not in coin but in humiliation. Evelyn carried that secret like a scar across her soul. When Garrett knocked at her door one night asking softly if she was awake, she quickly slid the box beneath the bed. He stepped inside, hesitant. "I thought maybe you'd like to sit on the porch. The stars are bright tonight." She looked at him, at the way his strength seemed tempered now with something gentler. Slowly she nodded, and when she followed him out, she left the letters unread for the first time in weeks. The next conflict came not from within, but from beyond. Eastern speculators had arrived. Men in tailored suits with eyes like vultures. They wanted land, water rights, and rail access. They offered to buy parcels at insulting prices, whispering promises of progress. Byron entertained them in the grand parlor, puffing cigars, speaking of profits. Garrett sat stiff at his father's side watching. Evelyn, veiled, listened from the corner. When one speculator sneered about backward ranch wives, Evelyn's voice cut through the smoke. "You speak of progress, sir," she said coolly. "Yet you measure land only by coin. This land bleeds under your kind. You'll find no progress here, only graves." The room stilled. The men chuckled uneasily, shifting in their seats. Byron's face burned red. Garrett fought the urge to smile. That night, Byron thundered at Garrett. "Control your wife. She shamed us in front of men who could have doubled our fortune." Garrett's reply was quiet but firm. "Maybe fortune isn't the only measure, father." The silence after that was heavier than any shout. One night, restless from the weight of family tensions, Garrett rode out to the creek. The moonlight shimmered across the water, casting silver across the plains. To his surprise, Evelyn was already there, sitting on a rock, her veil discarded beside her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, dismounting. She shook her head. "The walls of that house feel smaller every day." Garrett sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder. The creek whispered, crickets sang, the world hushed around them. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what it would be like if none of this mattered? If we were just ourselves? No Calloway, no McCrae, no debts, no legacy." Garrett's chest tightened. "Every damn day." Their eyes met, and for the first time the silence between them broke, not with words but with touch. He leaned in, and she did not pull away. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then hungry, fierce as if all the tension of weeks had finally found release. When they pulled back, breathless, Evelyn whispered, "We weren't meant to fall in love." Garrett's hand cupped her cheek. "Maybe that's the only reason we did." But love never blooms without shadow. Days later, a letter arrived, sealed in red wax, addressed to Evelyn. She paled when she saw the handwriting. That night, Garrett found her in her room, the letter open on her lap. Her face was white, her eyes storm-dark. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "what is it?" She folded the paper quickly, slipping it into her box. "Nothing that concerns you." But he knew. He knew by the tremor in her hand, the way she would not meet his gaze. Something from her past had returned. Something dangerous. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, heralding a storm not of weather, but of fate. Evelyn stared at the folded paper long after Garrett had left her alone. The handwriting was unmistakable, jagged, cruel, and etched into her memory like a brand. It belonged to Silas McCrae. Once, years ago, her father had borrowed heavily from McCrae, a ruthless rancher who made his fortune through debts and intimidation. When the McCraes failed to pay, Silas demanded something more humiliating, the promise of Evelyn's hand. Her father, desperate and broken, had nearly agreed. But Evelyn fled before such a bargain could be sealed. She swore she would never be owned by Silas McCrae, never shackled to a man who saw her as property. Now his letter burned in her hand. "You thought you escaped, girl, but I never forget my debts. Your marriage to Calloway won't save you. I'll come for what's mine." Evelyn slipped the paper into her box and pressed her palms to her face. She had traded one bargain for another. But how long before the past swallowed her present? Byron Calloway had seen enough. He watched his son lean toward Evelyn at supper, saw the way Garrett listened to her as though her words carried weight equal to his own. He noticed Evelyn's subtle influence in every decision Garrett made, and Byron hated it. One evening, after Garrett had gone to check the herds, Byron cornered Evelyn in the parlor. "You think because my son listens to you, you have power here," he growled. "But this house, this land, this family, they are Calloway, not McCrae." Evelyn met his glare without flinching. "Then perhaps you should remind yourself that Calloway survives only because McCrae land holds water." Byron's hand twitched at his cane as if he might strike her. Instead, he leaned close, his voice low and venomous. "You may fool my son, but you will never fool me. I see the shadows in your eyes. You're hiding something, and when I find it, I'll tear it from you." Evelyn's pulse thundered, but she held his stare. Byron left her standing in the parlor, her fists clenched, her secret burning hotter than ever. The fire had changed Garrett. Since that night, he couldn't look at Evelyn without remembering the way she'd stood beside him, soot-streaked and fierce. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew she didn't need saving. She needed partnership. Yet her distance gnawed at him. He saw the moments when she withdrew into herself, the flicker of fear behind her strength. He longed to break down those walls. One evening, as they rode the fence line, Garrett said quietly, "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Evelyn looked at him, eyes wide for just a moment before she turned away. "Some battles began long before you, Garrett, and they'll end long after." He wanted to press her. Instead, he reached for her hand, guiding her reins as they rode side by side into the gathering dusk. It wasn't long before whispers reached the ranch hands. A stranger had been seen near town asking questions about Evelyn McCrae, a man with a scar across his jaw and eyes like a snake. Garrett heard the rumor in the saloon, his gut clenched. That night, when Evelyn came to the porch, her veil discarded in the privacy of home, he asked, "Is there someone after you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she closed her eyes as though summoning courage. "There was a man, long ago. My father's debt bound me to him. I escaped, but debts don't vanish in this territory." Garrett's hand tightened on the railing. "Who?" "Silas McCrae." The name struck him like a hammer. McCrae was known, cruel, cunning, a man who used law and lawlessness alike to build his empire. Garrett turned to her, jaw set. "If he comes here, he'll find he's not the only one who can fight." Evelyn's throat ached. For the first time, she let him fold her into his arms, her cheek against his chest. For the first time, she let herself believe she wasn't alone. Byron Calloway wasted no time when he learned McCrae was in the territory. Unlike Garrett, Byron saw opportunity. At supper, Byron declared, "McCrae wants alliance. He's got influence with the rail company. If we play our cards right, Calloway land could double in value. Evelyn's fork clattered against her plate. Garrett's fists tightened. "You deal with McCrae?" Garrett demanded. "You know what kind of man he is." Byron's eyes narrowed. "I know he's a man who gets things done. Better to have him as an ally than an enemy." Evelyn rose abruptly from the table, veil trembling as she walked out. Garrett followed, his heart thundering. Outside, under the stars, Evelyn whispered, "If your father allies with him, everything I've tried to escape will come crashing back." Garrett cupped her face, tilting her gaze to his. "Then I'll stand against him, against McCrae, against my father if I must." The vow hung heavy in the night air, binding them tighter than any preacher's words. Weeks passed, each day thick with unease. McCrae's men lingered at the edges of town. Byron courted their influence, blind to the danger. Garrett worked harder than ever, rallying ranch hands, securing defenses, preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. And through it all, Evelyn stayed beside him. They pored over ledgers by lamplight, planned cattle drives, and shared stolen moments of tenderness on the porch. Love had crept in, slow but unstoppable, like a river carving stone. Yet beneath the sweetness lay fear. Evelyn knew McCrae would not rest until he reclaimed what he believed was his. And Byron Calloway's ambition might be the very knife that opened the door. One night, as thunder rumbled over the plains, Evelyn whispered to Garrett, "We weren't meant to fall in love. But maybe love is the only weapon we have." Garrett pulled her close, the storm breaking overhead. "Then let's fight with it." Outside, lightning split the sky, a warning of fire yet to come. The summer sun dipped lower each evening over the Calloway ranch, casting long shadows across the endless sea of grass. By now, Garrett Calloway and Evelyn McCrae had been married for several months, yet their marriage still walked a fragile line, part business, part unspoken yearning, part fear. Life on the ranch did not pause for tender feelings. There were cattle drives, contracts, storms, and men who depended on Garrett to keep order. And then there was Evelyn, who had slowly transformed the Calloway household from a cold monument of power into something that breathed warmth, even in silence, the whisper of change. At first, Garrett barely noticed how the house had shifted. Evelyn's hand was subtle. She did not overhaul or shout for attention. She simply replaced what was broken, polished what had dulled, and planted small blossoms where there had been only dust. A vase of wildflowers in the dining room. Fresh curtains on the drafty windows. The kitchen smelled less of stale coffee and more of cinnamon and bread. The ranch hands, too, had felt the difference. They spoke more respectfully when Evelyn passed by, not because of fear, but because she treated them like men rather than tools. She learned their names, remembered who had a brother lost in Cheyenne or who limped from an old fall. She never pried, but her quiet kindness lingered like a balm. Garrett, however, remained cautious. His heart, so long walled in, refused to acknowledge how easily she had begun to shape his world. He buried himself in ledgers and cattle counts, reminding himself that this marriage was still, at its roots, a deal. But then came the night of the fire. The call came just before midnight. One of the far barns, housing 30 head of cattle, had gone up in flames. A lantern kicked over by a nervous hand, or perhaps placed there deliberately. No one could be sure. Garrett woke to shouts, his boots pulling on before his eyes were fully open. He rushed out into the night, the sky glowing red with furious fire. Men were already mounted, rushing to form lines of buckets from the well. Smoke clawed into the heavens. Evelyn appeared at his side, her nightgown hidden beneath a hastily tied cloak, her hair tumbling free. "Stay inside," Garrett barked, half in fear, half in command. Her eyes flashed in the firelight. "And let the men burn alone, not tonight?" Before he could argue, she was running toward the barn, skirts flying, grabbing a bucket with steady hands. Garrett cursed under his breath and chased after her, his heart pounding with something fiercer than fear. Together, side by side, they fought the blaze. Smoke stung their lungs, embers seared their skin, but neither yielded. Evelyn's cloak caught at one point, a stray spark devouring the edge of fabric, and Garrett dropped everything to slap it out, gripping her shoulders with trembling hands. Their eyes met through the haze, raw, terrified, alive. For the first time since their vows, Garrett felt what it meant to lose her, and the thought hollowed him to the bone. By dawn, the barn was nothing but smoldering ruin. They saved half the herd, though the loss was heavy. Ash blanketed the land. Men slumped in exhaustion, and silence lingered where once there had been the roar of fire. Evelyn sat on the steps of the house, hair singed, hands blistered, her gown ruined with soot. Garrett approached her, weary, his chest aching with unspoken words. "You should have stayed inside," he said softly, almost brokenly. "And left you to fight alone?" she countered, voice hoarse but steady. "That's not who I am, Garrett." For a long moment they sat in silence, breathing in the smoke. Then, almost without thought, Garrett reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Their fingers, raw and bandaged, found one another like truth in the ashes. The fire had not been an accident. Within days, whispers began to spread that rival ranchers bitter at Calloway landholdings had a hand in the blaze. Some said the culprit was Thomas Calder, a man long jealous of Calloway influence. Others muttered about restless drifters, men who resented barons who claimed land as though it were inheritance rather than hard labor. Garrett knew the fire was a warning. The West was changing. Railroads, lawmen, and politics twisted together in a fight for power. The Calloways had enemies, and now Evelyn, by association, carried a target upon her back. One evening, while Garrett studied maps of the land at his desk, Evelyn entered with quiet steps. "You're worried," she said. He did not look up. "I'm calculating." "Call it what you will," she answered gently. "But I see the weight in your shoulders." He lifted his gaze then, and the shadows between them grew thinner. For the first time, he confessed, "If they come for me, I can stand it, but if they come for you—" His voice broke off. He clenched his jaw, looking away. Evelyn, steady as ever, laid a hand upon his arm. "Then we faced them together as—" Her words sank deep like rain into parched earth. Garrett had built his life on solitude, on bearing weight alone. But Evelyn's strength was not the loud strength of men with guns. It was quiet, enduring, like stone beneath the soil. And slowly he began to lean upon it. Weeks passed. Tension simmered in the town of Willow Creek. Garrett found himself summoned to meetings with ranchers, lawmen, even politicians from Denver. Land rights were disputed. Violence threatened, and whispers of Calder's next move reached every ear. Yet within the storm, moments of startling intimacy bloomed. Evelyn would find him late at night, shoulders hunched over papers, and place a cup of coffee by his side. He began walking with her in the evenings, watching how she looked at the stars as though they whispered secrets. One night, the town held a small dance in the square, lanterns strung between posts, fiddles singing into the dusty air. Garrett did not dance. He had never cared for such gatherings, preferring the certainty of ledgers to the uncertainty of human hearts. But Evelyn, she was different. She moved among the people with quiet grace, laughing softly at the children who tugged at her skirts, listening intently to the widows who spoke of hardship. Men watched her, some with admiration, some with envy, and Garrett felt an ache in his chest he did not have a name for. When she returned to him, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, he surprised them both by holding out his hand. "Dance with me," he said simply. The fiddles played, the lanterns glowed, and Evelyn's hand slid into his. Together they moved in slow circles. Not perfectly in time, but perfectly enough. Garrett's arm found her waist, her head brushed near his shoulder, and for a fleeting moment the world vanished into rhythm and breath. When the song ended, he did not let go immediately, and when he finally did, their eyes lingered too long, speaking all the words they had not yet dared. By late summer, Garrett could no longer deny what had taken root inside him. It was not convenience. It was not merely partnership. It was something fierce, fragile, and terrifying. But confessing such feelings, for a man who had built his life upon pride and control, was no small task. His tongue, trained to command cattlemen and negotiate land, faltered when faced with the simple truth of love. One evening, after a long day of repairing fences, he found Evelyn on the porch, mending a tear in her cloak. The fading sun bathed her in light, and Garrett felt the urge to speak. He sat beside her, silent for a long time, watching her hands move. Finally he said, "Do you regret it, marrying me?" She looked up, startled, then studied his face. "At first, perhaps, I thought I was just another piece of land in your ledger." "And now?" His voice was almost a whisper. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Now I'm not so sure." The